Okay, everyone, it's 12:02 on July 16th. I think let's get started. Welcome to Dam Busters. My name is Monica Driggers, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Massachusetts Rivers Alliance. Welcome. As I said, this Dam Buster series is a collaboration between us, the Charles River Watershed Association, and the Massachusetts Division of Ecological Restoration. You're joining us today for, as you see on our intro slide here, a webinar about the national state of dam removal. It's a great topic for our summer session. And I'll say a little bit more about our awesome speaker, Serena McLean, in just a few minutes. Overall, for the series topics and the exact schedule, please visit the Mass Rivers Alliance website at www.massriversalliance.org. I want to give you some new details about our upcoming sessions because we're not following our usual first Wednesday of the month schedule for August and September. So first of all, there will be no webinar in August, so y'all can have a great vacation. Hopefully you can enjoy some time on a river. Please stay tuned for announcements about one or possibly two dam removal site visits. We're in the process of making those arrangements right now, and we hope to send out information and registration details in the coming couple of weeks. Okay, the September session will be in person on September 26th in Worcester. It will focus on community engagement with a panel of speakers on that topic, as well as an interactive charrette with Emily Vogler from the Rhode Island School of Design. Some of you may have seen Emily's excellent work, and she does a great presentation that simulates community engagement. So we'll be sending out registration information for that session soon. And then we'll return to our regular first Wednesday of the month schedule in October with a session on how to work with your local conservation commission. Just a few housekeeping items. Number one, the session is scheduled to end at 1. 2, please put your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, which we will track, or you can hold them until the last half hour's question and answer session. Third, please put your name and affiliation in the chat. And if you aren't affiliated with a particular institution, just tell us where you're joining us from today. And lastly, note that the webinars are being recorded. Recordings and any other webinar materials will be made available on the Mass Rivers website. Okay, so today I really want to make a special plea to ask folks to complete our survey. The response rate, unfortunately, in the last few sessions has gone down. So right now we have 700 people across 6 countries, 18 states, and 165 Massachusetts towns that are registered for Dam Busters. We want to keep the series free and accessible to everyone that has signed up, and we really rely on your survey responses to help us do that. Our funders want evaluative information about what we're doing, and we need your help to expand and improve the series. For this session, we're going to be putting up a QR code at the end to make it easier for you to complete the survey, and we'll also be putting the link in the chat. And I hope you won't be annoyed with me if I send you follow-up emails with survey information as well. And now I'm delighted to welcome back our speaker today, Serena McLean of American Rivers, who also presented for us earlier this year. She is the Senior Director of American Rivers National Dam Removal Program. She's worked in the river restoration field for more than 20 years, focusing largely on dam removal planning. While at American Rivers, she has managed and advised on multiple on-the-ground dam removal projects, spearheaded state and federal policy initiatives, and overseen 2 restoration grant programs administered by the organization. She's currently responsible for leading the organization's efforts to expand the practice of dam removal in the U.S., to improve river health and enhance safety and quality of life for communities. And with that, I will hand it over to Serena.
Thanks so much, Monica. I appreciate that introduction. No pressure at all. And thank you for inviting me today to talk about the state of the dam removal movement in the United States. I was hoping that, there we go, so we could have a casual conversation with us here and talk a bit about specifically about what we've seen in terms of numbers. Everybody likes the stats, figures, and data in terms of what the dam removal movement looks like. But I also want to just share and offer you all the opportunity to share some mid-year reflections and where we see the rest of this year going. And then finally, I wanted to end by opening up a bit about where American Rivers is headed and where we'd like to see the entire dam removal movement head in the next coming years. I'm going to go back a slide and just share again that as Monica mentioned, with American Rivers, our goal is to restore damaged rivers, protect wild rivers, and conserve clean water for people and nature. We have been actively both removing dams and advocating for the removal of dams for roughly the past 27 years, beginning with our involvement in the removal of the Edwards Dam on the Kennebec River. Since that time, we've seen, the dam removal movement really ramp up and grow. And I will say that 2024 was a banner year for the country. In 2024, more than 108 dams were removed across 27 states. And even more impressively, over 2,500 river miles were reconnected. Pennsylvania continues to lead if we're looking by sheer number of dams removed. Pennsylvania continues to lead the country in the number of dams removed, with 27 dams removed in the 2024 period. But, honestly, there are many other states around the country that are, chomping at their heels. I have to credit my colleague, Jesse Thomas Blake, for this slide. I'll admit that superlatives aren't my favorite. I know if you're involved in dam removal and work with communications folks, we're constantly asked for how to characterize something as the biggest, the best, or the most. But I also know that people like statistics and just trivia facts. So I thought I'd share this here. In 2024, the tallest dam that came out was the Iron Gate Dam on the Klamath River at 188 feet tall. It's not a lot of really long dams in the country, and the longest dam that was removed this past year was the White Mill Dam on the Dan River in Virginia that clocked in at almost 1,200 feet long. In Massachusetts, you actually removed the oldest dam in the country, and I'd be really curious to learn more about some of the age of some of the older structures in the state. But the Lyman Pond Dam number 2 did finally come out, and that structure was built in 1731. The most upstream river miles that were reconnected actually occurred in Indiana with the removal of the Cordon North Bridge Dam. They reconnected with that one single project over 570 miles of stream, which is fantastic. And in terms of sub-watersheds with the most removals, right, which I think this is an important one to highlight in some of the data that we've analyzed, is how to look at not only individual removals themselves, but really like what we're doing in terms of watershed connectivity, right, and building on this. And there, in 2024, there was a tie between the Connoquenessing and the Monocacy rivers, both in Pennsylvania, who in 2024 alone removed 6 dams apiece. The bottom line is that 2024 was a good year and resulted in the overall number of dams jumping to 2,240. When we released these figures in February of 2025. And leading up to that, I did some preliminary analysis on the 2024 numbers to better understand, specifically, I was looking to better understand the role of public funding and the bipartisan infrastructure legislation in particular, like what, if any, effect it was having in how the flux and the number of dams that were being removed. Based on the data we collected, and I will caveat here that, all of this is voluntarily reported by folks like you. Some folks will readily report funding information, others don't. In places where folks didn't report it, I did do some online research, but again, these are ballpark figures, right? But of the dams that came out, of the 108 dams, I should say, that came out in 2024, more than 48% of the dams received some form of public funding. At least 13 of the dams that were removed actually were removed with BIL infrastructure funding. But the one thing that was enlightening for me and that, I shared with our team at American Rivers, is that state funding really did play a huge role in our ability, our to implement projects across the country. The other interesting thing that the data confirmed is that there's still a significant number of removals that are happening and being driven by safety, liability, and economic considerations. In 2024, more than 43% of the dams reported were motivated by those factors. 2024, was a banner year, as I mentioned at the top. It is tied with 2019 for the most number of removals. There were 108 removals in 2019 and 107 removals in 2028. This map just provides another way of looking at the numbers. It lets you look at like the number of dam removals per state. And I want to point out Massachusetts. Massachusetts, since we started tracking, and the earliest dated dam removal in our database is from 1912. But we have several that are undated. But throughout the history of time, Massachusetts has removed 92 dams. That's fantastic. And I just, I reflect again on like the factors, the enabling conditions that allow states to remove as many dams as they have. And I can't help but think, like, imagine what Massachusetts could unlock if things like, it's the fact that it didn't take almost 2 years to get a dam permitted, right? Like if there were these small changes in the system, imagine what it could unlock. I also just want to point out, the context of Massachusetts having removed 92 dams with some of the other high-performing states around the country. And if you look at both the surface area of those particular states and how large they are, as well as the sheer volume of dams they have, I think you'll be able to hopefully appreciate Massachusetts' overwhelmingly positive impact that it has for such a small state that takes up a much smaller geographic surface area. I also just want to share, when you look at the states, it's always interesting to think about what's influencing some of those numbers. For example, when you look at California and you see that they've removed 188 dams, which is certainly laudable and impressive, you should know that 80 of those dams were all removed in one particular forest district, the Cleveland Forest District, and on Trabuco Creek, and I'm forgetting the name of the other creek off the top of my head. But they undertook an environmental assessment probably 7 or 8 years ago now, where they actually analyzed all the dams for potential removal that weren't serving a purpose in that particular forest district. So more than 80 of those dams in California were removed in one forest unit. I think California, when you think about the number of dams removed and stream miles restored as a whole, that would certainly shrink without the work of that forest district. I also like to share that example because it points out what you can do when you look at barriers and their impact as a collective unit and look to analyze and assess their potential removal collectively. I wanted to share this. American Rivers wrapped up our most recent strategic plan in June, and I compiled these figures to reflect on with my team. And you'll note that the period of time I was analyzing was 2020 to 2024. As you might expect, we wait until the end of we analyze numbers on a calendar year and wait until the end of the calendar year to calculate. So, 2024's numbers were released in February of 2025. We won't have figures for 2025 until next year. But over this 4-year period, 409 dams were removed, 6,873 river miles were reconnected. There was, at a minimum, 508 projects in development across the country. We saw 190% growth in our community of practice. And again, because I was sharing this internally, over the 4-year period, American Rivers expanded our dam removal staff specifically by 200%. I wanted to share these here because this growth isn't just American Rivers, right? It represents the hard work of everyone in our community of practice. when we look at those 409 dams removed and the almost 6,900 river miles reconnected, certainly a portion of those projects are projects that American Rivers had teamed on and are managed or were involved in. But again, we're looking collectively at what all of you have done, all of us have done. And it's just, I want folks to be able to, pat themselves on the back, because that's pretty impressive that we were able to get that accomplished over a 4-year period. This is my pitch for the importance of sharing data. We do collect every year a voluntary survey of the dams removed around the country. It's reported from partners, state and federal agencies, contractors, municipalities, and it includes a wide variety of data such as height, length, location, type, and the like. We also do collect the other information like the cost of the removal. There are a few other data cells that we collect. We don't make all of the data publicly available because it is more erratically reported, and it's a bit harder to QA/QC. So if we aren't able to QA/QC some of the data, or we don't have enough folks reporting out on that data field, we don't share that full body of research. But I just, I do want to encourage you to share your data when the data collection effort comes around annually. It really helps us analyze trends, figure out what's working and what needs addressing in any given state. And this data, again, is publicly shared on Figshare, and researchers at USGS and academic institutions across the country do use this data in some of their research studies that they're pulling together. Thinking about, I just talked a lot about 2024 and kind of what we've seen 2024 and beyond, but I have done some reflecting, in the middle of 2025 about what we're seeing. And in thinking about this presentation and, what I was able to share, I thought about, 3 different arenas that I'm kind of looking at. We're looking at funding. What's the state of funding currently? What are the opportunities and challenges we think we're going to see, and what will that do to our 2025 numbers? There's certainly things going on in the regulatory arena and how that may or may not affect the work. And then just what the outlook is for the number of projects that are happening. I think all of you probably on the phone here know who do dam removal projects. We are in the thick of construction season right now. From a funding perspective, I think we're all waiting to see what the impacts of a lot of the federal changes, both in staffing and funding that we see are, and the effect that they will have. I've heard from folks across the country, there are certainly federal grants that continue to move forward, and partners and proponents are able to continue to move projects forward and get them to construction this year. I also know there are several funding sources that continue to be rescinded. And, I've received emails, about projects that are either stalled now or on hold because of that fairly regularly. And I think to predict what impact this is going to have, or what we think this will look like in the next coming 2 years, would be the height of hubris. I think things are unstable enough that we just don't know. I will say, from a funding perspective, one of the things that has brought me a lot of hope, and that American Rivers we continue to choose to focus on, is the steady increase in the amount of state funding all around the country that is and continues to be allocated to environmental causes, barrier removal, addressing climate resiliency. That state funding played an incredibly important role in a lot of the removals that came out this year. And I think as federal funding sources continue to be unpredictable at best, I think from American Rivers perspective, and we're encouraging all of our partners as well, continuing to figure out how to grow and increase the sustainability of some of those state funds is going to continue to be incredibly important. And I know Massachusetts is one of those states that has had, I don't know if robust is the right term, but you've done the state has done some really great things in terms of being able to provide funding for barrier removal, both to address these dams and culverts from a climate and a safety perspective, as well as from an aquatic connectivity and restoration perspective. In the regulatory arena, and I know it's a little bit different for Massachusetts and New England, but the Corps of Engineers is currently has the nationwide permits up for review. That comment period ends July 18th. And so we have been reviewing and commenting on nationwide permit 53, which is the Lowhead Dam Removal Permit, as well as nationwide permit 27, which is a restoration permit that has been used for dam removal in the past. There is also a new permit, and I'm forgetting the number off the top of my head, but it is specifically for fish passage. So it's a nice addition and a nod to fish passage and the importance of aquatic connectivity that did make its appearance in the nationwide permits. And from a project perspective, there are still projects moving forward. Again, I don't really know what the 2025 numbers will look like because of the instability and unpredictability of the federal funding, but I do know, American Rivers has, I think, 6 or 7 projects that are going to construction this fall at a minimum. There may be more. I've heard from other partners that have projects moving forward. I would love it if all of you, if you've got a dam removal project that is in construction or going to construction in 2025, add that to the chat. I'm certainly also interested if you want to add it to the chat in any, if your project's ability to go to construction is being affected by the federal instability at the moment. But I remain ever hopeful that 2025 from a dam removal perspective will continue to be a solid year. I want to talk a little bit about the future. I kind of want to end with hopefully a positive motivational outlook. But over the next 4 years, American Rivers has committed to working with our community of practice to collectively remove 500 dams and reconnect 5,000 river miles. We've made it a goal to work with states across the country to advance 3 to 5 policy initiatives, and they could be legislative, ballot initiatives, rulemaking, et cetera, to strengthen state dam safety offices, and or store up or increase state funding sources. We anticipate helping launch 10 state aquatic connectivity teams or state dam removal communities of practice in some of the states around the country that don't have them. And a lot of those are going to be probably in the middle of the Midwest and the western part of the country. The East Coast has quite a few of those teams, which have been really effective in getting some of these victories. And then we also have a goal to deliver 28 trainings and webinars. And for 2020, or our fiscal year 2026, I think we have 7 trainings on tap for the coming year. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. This right here really looks at, part of our theory of change for how we increase and scale dam removal. And in order to do that in any given state and even nationally, we look at 4 things. We're looking for ways to incentivize dam removal, which, tends to focus on how can you effectively leverage or strengthen state dam safety programs? How can we have effective and enforceable state fish passage laws? There's the need to increase capacity. If you're scaling dam removal and you're looking to step up the pace, we need a workforce of trained project managers. And we need resources out there like the Dam Busters and like Massachusetts River Alliance and everything you all are doing. We need qualified consultants to design and permit projects. And then we need to keep that pipeline of projects going. We need prioritized projects that address the highest priority, socially feasible dam removal projects. So incentivize dam removal, increase capacity, build the movement. How can we collectively as a whole continue to learn and grow together? How can we help others establish these state communities of practice, things like the Vermont Dams Task Force or the New Jersey State Dam Removal Partnership or the North Carolina Aquatic Connectivity Team, to help advance some of these other initiatives, right? Like advocate for the stronger state dam safety programs, advocate for additional state funding, and continue to look to increase non-traditional support for dam removal across different sectors. Are there opportunities to partner with dam operators? Are we, helping support and ensure tribal nations as they look to remove dams? Things like that. And then finally, of that four-pronged approach is growing the funding base. Again, we need increased sustainable funding from both federal and private resources, and really dedicated state funding sources in particular for dam removal, or that could be used for dam removal. What does this look like on the ground? I wanted to share this. Earlier this year, American Rivers launched a Lowhead Dam safety campaign. And you can find a link to the website with the QR code or the URL. But this is the beginning of a campaign, multi-year campaign, where we'll be working with certain states. And I say certain states because, we're still a relatively small organization and don't have the capacity currently to work in every state, but working with states where it's needed to ensure that get change where we can, such that state dam safety programs include basic language saying that lowhead dam removal is important to the state, and including the potential to increase regulation of lowhead dams, working on rules or legislation requiring safety signage at dams in states where they don't have that, as well as language requiring bonds or insurance for dam owners in terms of the upkeep of those dams. As these dams continue to age, I think all of you know many of them are being hammered by increasing frequency of extreme storms. There have been more than 1,300 failures or emergency interventions. What's shocking to me is that 80% of those were in the last 20 years. State dam safety offices are underfunded, they're understaffed, and I think Massachusetts knows this, the threat of extreme weather and storms, better than anyone. I know some of the work that your dam safety office has done and some of the funding sources that have become available were a direct result of the threat of some of the failures in Massachusetts. An example of how this is playing out in other parts of the country and how it's being used as a catalyst to derive funding and change. One of the most recent ones is Tropical Storm Helene. It ravaged Western North Carolina in September of 2024, and during those storms, at least 41 dams either failed or were severely damaged during the storm. What that has recently resulted in is an additional $10 million in North Carolina Dam Safety Grant Fund. American Rivers worked in partnership with our folks at Mountain True and Pew Charitable Trust to ensure this policy was signed into law to fund high hazard dams damaged by Helene. So it's House Bill 1012, but it sends funds to the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality to repair, modify, or remove dams that were damaged by the hurricane. And so that's just one way that, folks, again, and we're encouraging people in different places across the United States to use some of these tragedies in a way to get change that will hopefully better prepare us for the future. We also, breaking news, we are releasing a new white paper by Dr. Sarah Null out of Utah State University. It actually came out today, and we'll be happy to share it. But she wrote a white paper on the intersection of dam removal and climate change, just providing a little bit more information and an outlook on what the coming climate changes and extreme weather mean for the state of dam removal, and how dam removal could be a tool among a suite of tools to help us increase resiliency and prepare for that. Finally, as I mentioned, our immediate outlook at American Rivers is continuing to provide trainings and workshops all across the country. I put a short list here of some of the types of workshops and trainings we do. Are the two sweet spots that we do the most are our dam removal project manager trainings and our state capacity building or scaling workshops. The capacity building and scaling workshop is really to help states develop a community of practice and then work with them to identify those enabling conditions and begin to craft a work plan for their first year or two. We also do custom workshops. I was recently in Texas. I did a half-day dam removal 101 workshop. They are at the place now where they're beginning to get comfortable with the idea of talking about dam removal. We've done workshops specifically related to sediment management, dam removal workshops targeted toward regulators. And in addition to some of these workshops, again, we have a suite of webinars that we do, and the link to the playlist is there. And then we'll be continuing to do some of those webinars in 2025 and 2026 as well. We have a number of resources on our website. You can find a link to click on some of those categories on this page. Our goal over the coming years is to continue to expand and reorganize our resources to ensure they're even more accessible to folks who are looking to see them. I still want to encourage folks, if you haven't already, to join our National Community of Practice, where we share tools and share these tools, resources, and news from around the country. And you can sign up using the QR code there. There isn't a cost, but we're hopeful in the coming year or two, we'll be able to create a platform that will let folks also be able to connect and chat and share information with each other online as well. With that, I want to end, and I want to thank Monica and Anna for having me. It's a pleasure to talk about, kind of the dam removal movement, the state of dam removal around the country. I will say that I am hopeful because there has been a steady drumbeat and increasing in momentum. And I think as we experience climate change and the weather worsens and our dams continue to age, I think the reality is, and honestly, in fish and mussel and other species, continue to be on the brink of extinction. I think dam removal, provides us an opportunity, a pathway to restore and reclaim some of what is lost. So I remain hopeful in this work, and I hope you all do as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Serena. That was a fantastic overview. And I thought I had some sense of the national state, but now I feel like I have a far better picture of everything that you all at American Rivers have been doing, plus, what's going on in other states. It's really good to see. And it's also nice to see Massachusetts stand out a bit on some facets of dam removal. I just want to remind everybody that we have on the webinar today that if you have a question, you can put it in the Q&A feature. And I just want to point out that I did put the link for our evaluation survey in the chat. Again, it takes less than 5 minutes. So just a really quick thing you can do to help us out. So we do have two great questions from Lisa to start us off. The first is, how are you choosing states to support in various ways, like legislative or capacity building?
No, that's a fantastic question. One of which we like to be asked. we try really hard not to go where we aren't invited or we don't currently have relationships, particularly when it comes to workshops, right? And things like that. I will say, legislatively, we're looking for where there are opportunities. We prioritized for the next 4 years because we needed a short list to help our government relations staff kind of wrap their heads around this. And New Jersey, North Carolina, California, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and it might have been Maine, one of the states. But I will say, if there are opportunities for us, that being said, that again was the short list, with the real understanding that if there's opportunities for us to support or help generate rule changes, legislative guidance, legislation, bond initiatives, whatever, shoot me an email. Use the contact information that we shared up there. If you've got a contact with somebody else at American Rivers, Andy Fisk is our Northeast Regional Director, shoot someone at American Rivers an email, and, we'll be able to help, figure out how we can help, because we are very interested in supporting this effort. I will say, let me add one other clarification point. We're more likely able to help if it's a place where we already have a region, where we have staff already working. If it is, there are places in the country where we don't have staff, like the Great Lakes, or, kind of the middle of the country, it's a lot harder for us to be able to assist and have an impact. But particularly anywhere on the East Coast where we have even the lightest of coverage, I think we're more than happy to help.
Thank you. That was really a great question from Lisa, and a very informative response. So her next question is, across the country, have you seen rights of nature implemented, the rights of nature movement implemented to improve dam removal, and/or has American Rivers thought about advocating for using this approach at all? I mean, I personally know that First Nations in Canada has had some success with rights of nature and, designating a river, essentially personhood. So yeah, interesting to know whether American Rivers has approached this.
We have not formally approached it. It is definitely, particularly as, we also kind of saw some of the stuff coming out of Canada with the First Nations, and even it came up in conversations around the Klamath, right? And moving those towards removal. And it is on our radar screen, and it's a conversation that's happened internally, informally. At this time, there's no official movement or call one way or the other to dedicate more time to advocacy for the rights of the river, but those conversations are ongoing, I will say.
Great.
You have to watch me. I tend to overshare, so I'm minding my P's and Q's.
It's tempting. I get it. It is a movement that seems to be gaining a little bit of steam. Okay. I have questions, but again, for those of you who are listening, please feel free to put some questions in either in the chat or at this point, in Q&A or in chat. So my question is, you talked about the importance of state funding, and we here in Massachusetts have made, a pretty strong push, many partners together, and I think we're seeing some success. But in the states where there's little funding for, dam removal, what kinds of obstacles are the advocates in those states facing? And where have you seen them enjoy some success, or where do you think they're gaining a little bit of ground?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think some of the obstacles are just where the state budget won't support, right, any additional pulls on revenue. That's one of the places where we're in the process of doing analysis of some of the state funding sources to really look at how the revenue is generated to support that piece. I think an example of that is looking to Pennsylvania's Growing Greener program. It has been successful in funding not only dam removals over the course of the last 15 or more years, but also other types of environmental restoration. And the funding for that particular project funding source was generated from trash fees, right? So looking at ways we can also not only create a funding source to generate revenue. I think the other things that, the things that we're encouraging folks to consider when you want to either initiate or grow a state funding source is to think more broadly about where that funding could live, and the fact that that funding may live in multiple places, right? I think a lot of us who've been doing dam removal for a really long time, we think of aquatic connectivity and fish passage. And so we want to think of funding for fish passage, and it should be at a state natural resource agency or the wildlife resource agency. And I think that certainly is a place where funding could go, but we've also successfully seen different states, certainly dam safety really is like a sweet spot, right? Because at the end of the day, dam infrastructure in a stream, it either needs to be, if it's, providing a purpose that cannot be replaced, it needs to be maintained and potentially rehabilitated over time or removed. And so figuring out how we can increase capacity to, to address dam infrastructure from a safety perspective is important. So that's one particular place. Recreation. We've seen some states really leverage recreational funding sources that include dam removal funding sources in boating access funds or outdoor recreation funds, again, as a way to increase connectivity, get more people on the river safely. And so that, like, thinking about diversifying the different pots of state funding you can look toward has been something that we're really.
Great, thank you. I actually have another great question from Paul, but as long as we're talking about dam safety, I just wanted to ask you to maybe give us a little bit of more information on the Lowhead dam safety campaign and like how that's operating right now.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Right now, it's like I said, we just launched it at the end of May officially. So it's mostly been about creating the communication resources and sharing those with the group. So in the form of, we did a webinar at the end of May on drowning hazards and Lowhead dams with American Whitewater. There's a fact sheet on the website. If you go to that, there's advocacy in WRDA to have a national Lowhead Dam inventory, working with Rollin Hotchkiss out of Brigham Young. I think the subcommittee he is leading is through ASCE, EWRI, also with SARP in their national barrier inventory. So it's an effort to ensure that Lowhead barriers are properly inventoried and show up on maps. In terms of a lot of the advocacy, again, is going to be state focused, because it does involve how can we change the guidelines or regulations in specific states. And we have not identified all of the states where, one, there's an opportunity, right? Because some states either may have, good legislation, or there's not really the political will for change at this time, and where we have capacity. Let's say we have a burgeoning campaign around this to start in Pennsylvania. And that opportunity really was, again, born out of tragedy. Often, like, for some of these big changes, there needs to be a catalytic event, right, to get people's attention on it. And in Pennsylvania, on Memorial Day weekend, a state park ranger drowned at a dam while trying to erect buoys to keep people away from that dam on the holiday weekend. And as a result of that tragedy, there has been a lot of state interest in new dam safety legislation. So because the campaign, the broader campaign overall, though, in terms of sharing resources and tools is new, I expect to see it grow over the coming year. I know we're going to roll out some state model policy guidance that folks hopefully will be able to pick up and use and use to assess the state of your dam safety regulations, and then figure out what, if anything, you might want to see added or changed in your state.
Wow, what a comprehensive program. I'm glad I asked. Okay, I want to ask Paul's question now. Sediment management, particularly passive release, remains a strong sticking point with state agencies and in their enforcement of the Clean Water Act. Are there any new resources or efforts to help resolve this point of friction?
Yeah, it's a good question and an old question, Paul. It's the one that doesn't stop. I don't, in terms of new resources, I don't know of any new resources that are on the scene. I'm assuming you're all familiar with the Bureau of Reclamations and the Interagency Committee on Sedimentation, their sediment guidelines for dam removal projects. Those were released. I don't know what time is anymore. They were released sometime between 2019 and 2021. Those aren't relatively new. There are certainly some new publications. But I can't think of any new specific resources that would be useful that you probably haven't already seen. Certainly looking at the EPA FAQ and their comments on dam removal and water quality standard attainability has been really helpful in my work when advocating with state agencies on 401 water quality certifications. But again, those have been around for a few years now. In terms of efforts to help resolve this, we continue to have a lot of conversations. I think a lot of what we're seeing, Becca, as with most of the work, like, there are national tools that are available. What we found, it does really boil down to having these individual state negotiations, right? Depending on where what the 401 water quality certification process is in the state and where the stumbling blocks are. I know one of the tools that we've been angling to try, and we haven't actually been able to like test it yet, is we had pitched what we called like an uncommon dialogue for sedimentation and sediment management, as a way to bring, a facilitated conversation over a series of months to bring parties together to come up with collaborative guidance that addresses and meets like the needs of all parties in relation to sediment and sediment management at dam removal sites. We were positing doing this in Pennsylvania, believe it or not, because there's been a bit of a shift in thinking around sediment and sediment management following dam removal in the state. But like I said, we haven't actually, it's an effort that hasn't been funded yet, and we haven't been able to roll it out. But, I do think it has potential to be helpful.
Okay, we have a question now from Carrie. Can you speak to how developing statewide priorities and strategies can assist in increasing capacity in dam removal projects? Who, like agency, advocacy, local or regional groups, is best suited to lead, and how do these priorities get set?
That's a really good question. I'm going to start with the last one first, like who's best suited to lead. I mean, I think that varies from state to state. We've seen in the past the team, like we've done a lot of this work through either state aquatic connectivity teams, or again, some of these they all have a different name, but I'm just calling them like a state community of practice. And oftentimes, like, for me, the most effective way for one, these groups to be led, but two, to actually develop shared priorities and get change, is for there to be dual leadership, typically involving a state agency, if possible, so that you've got state buy-in at some level from some person, right? And for the most part, an NGO. And by the NGO, they're usually an NGO or a nonprofit with either state or local presence, right? To lead or co-lead that group. The reality of that is, once you have like those shared priorities and work plans, what we found is, like, depending on what the group wants to prioritize, there have been different committees that branch off, and folks tend to focus on different things. For example, let's talk about, it's easier for me to talk with specific examples, but the $10 million in funding for North Carolina dam safety that just got passed as a result of following the damage from Tropical Storm Helene. That idea, and like the North Carolina Aquatic Connectivity Team, was kind of the incubator for this idea and concept that we needed to increase state funding sources in order to be able to continue to remove dams in the state of North Carolina. The reality is, like, that group is the intersection of many different government agencies, nonprofits, universities, tribal nations, and particularly when we think about government agencies, they may not have the ability or authority to to advocate for additional state funding or new funding sources. So, we'll have either groups that splinter off, or, like things like a policy committee form, where agencies or others who may not either have the interest or the ability to advocate for policy changes or, legislative changes, where they won't have to participate, but those who can will. In terms of like how we develop state priorities and strategies, it's kind of trying to think about how to simplify this. Our first step has been either for American Rivers or collectively with these teams to do like a really baseline audit, right, of where a state sits. And so we've based all of our strategies on a series of enabling conditions that we've looked and seen, and Massachusetts has a lot of these. But like for states that are removing more dams, right, and who are more successful, like what's the secret sauce? What enabling conditions do they have in place that allows them to be successful? And, it falls into categories like state funding, like, what's the strength or what do their dam safety policies look like? As that an effective tool? What does the fish passage policies look like? Are there additional dam owner incentives? Is there state leadership? Is there state leadership with one of the agencies? Regulatory. Is the regulatory environment conducive to dam removal? Could it be changed? So you do this audit of any given state, and then it varies honestly from group to group. But the way that we've done it that I think has been really successful is to then kind of take these and have like a really interactive workshop, basically, where we talk about these conditions. You get, like the WHO, all of these groups and agencies and folks that we've talked about in the room, and we have a facilitated conversation where we pull information from the group about, that shores up the audit and gives you the state of play, but then also as a group, they're able to take them through an exercise where you then prioritize where you actually think you can get movement and change at the state level. And then from that, the result has been a shared work plan that some of these communities and practitioner groups will then move forward. And like I said, with that shared work plan, it might be collectively shared. The reality is different people are going to play different roles in different aspects of that body of work and what gets done.
Well, great question from Carrie and great answer, particularly since we have so many people attending from so many different states. I bet that's going to be very useful information to some of the folks who are attending. So I think that is the end of our Q&A, and I don't see any other questions coming up. I think, Anna, you can put up the survey slide. And while you all are accessing the QR code for the survey, I think it's coming up in a second here. I want to thank Serena for sharing all of this information. I mean, I think American Rivers has done a lot to inspire all of us and also to substantively help us in in doing dam removal work, which, as all of you know, is certainly not easy. And I want to thank all of you for attending today on a summer session, which, not everybody's around. So we hope that we were able to give you some information that you can really use, even though it's summer and people are kind of off. I want to note that the recording and all the additional resources will be available on our website in the next few days, including some of the resources that Serena mentioned, like the link for the National Dam Removal Database and the white paper that she mentioned. We will get all of that together for you. So again, Dam Busters will not be meeting in August. We hope that you will look out for information we'll be sending you, of course, on taking our survey, which I keep harping on, but also for the in-person session that's coming up in September and the site visits that we are trying to get together. So thanks to everybody for joining us in July, and we will see you soon. Take care.